You know, history always remembers the superstars, right? The front man, the names up in lights. But what about the people who were right there, just before the big explosion? The ones who exist just outside the frame? Well, today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating new play that imagines the story of two men who were almost Beatles.
The entire story really hinges on this one beautiful idea, the ghost note. See, in music, it's this essential, almost invisible part of the rhythm. And in this play, it becomes this incredibly powerful metaphor for two men whose contributions were absolutely felt, but never consciously heard.
So, the play, which is perfectly titled Ghost Note, brings two of music history's most famous ghost notes right out of the shadows and puts them smack dab in the center of the stage.
Now, it's really important to remember this is a fictionalized story. The play doesn't claim these meetings actually happened. Instead, it asks a much more interesting question. What if they did? What would these two guys, Pete Best and Jimmy Nicol, have actually said to each other?
Okay, so let's meet our two main characters. We're talking about two men who sat on the very same drum throne, powered the same world-changing band, but never, ever shared a stage.
So on one hand, you've got Pete Best. I mean, this guy was there for the grind, 2 hard years, forging the band's sound in those gritty clubs in Hamburg and Liverpool. And his dismissal, right on the cusp of superstardom, is something he carries like a stone in his chest. Then there's Jimmy Nicol. His experience was like a flash of lightning, just 13 days filling in for a sick Ringo at the absolute peak of Beatlemania. It all ends with a gold watch and a quiet trip back to an empty airport. Just wow.
This line from the play just perfectly captures Pete's character when we meet him. Years later, he's not a rock and roll drummer anymore. He's a man finding this quiet refuge in the simple, repetitive work of being a baker. It's such a powerful image of what a life looks like after the dream just ends.
And that bakery, well, that's the setting for their imagined first meeting in Act 1, set back in Liverpool in 1965.
The way they meet has this incredible, quiet tension. A down-on-his-luck Jimmy Nicol just wanders in, totally clueless about who the baker is. But Pete, he knows immediately. But instead of saying anything, he just offers this quiet act of kindness, tossing in some extra pastries. It's not until Jimmy stumbles on an old music magazine that he finally puts it all together, leading to this slow, careful acknowledgement between them over 3 mornings.
And this is Pete's beautifully understated reason for his silence. He got Jimmy's situation on a level that almost nobody else could. He didn't just recognize his face, he recognized his circumstances. You know, hunger comes before pride, and kindness comes before conversation.
So this quiet understanding, it builds to the real heart of the play. Act 2 jumps forward 3 years to 1968. Jimmy comes back to the bakery, and the two of them spend a long night just talking in the storeroom. And this is where everything just clicks into place. Pete asks what seems like a really simple question about Jimmy's brief time on tour. He's digging for a memory, a little detail that connects Jimmy's whirlwind 13 days to something much, much bigger.
And there's the answer. After every single show, when Paul McCartney would check in on the new guy, Jimmy would just give this simple, polite reply, "It's getting better." Just an off-the-cuff phrase from a guy trying to keep his head above water.
And here it is, the moment of absolute magic. Jimmy's unassuming phrase, just repeated in backstage hallways, it got stuck in Paul McCartney's head. Years later, it becomes the title and the lyrical core of Getting Better, one of the best tracks, track 5 to be exact, on the legendary Sgt. Pepper's album. Without even knowing it, Jimmy had become a ghost note in the greatest album of all time. And without one realization, Pete finally puts a name to their shared experience. They weren't failures. They weren't footnotes. They were essential, unheard contributors. They gave the music something real. And then, the song just moved on. This realization leads to this absolutely wonderful, cathartic moment. These two men, who never got to play together, they create an impromptu drum session right there on the bakery supplies, bread tins and flour sacks. 2 different styles, one jazz-influenced, the other a rock-solid foundation, finally finding a shared rhythm.
So, the play's final act. It lands in a much more somber and historic moment.
So, their unlikely friendship, right? It started in a Liverpool bakery in '65, it was solidified in that storeroom in '68, and now it takes one last really poignant turn. We find ourselves in New York City in 1980.
12 years after that storeroom session, the two men meet again, completely by chance. They're just strangers on a bench, 2 guys from Liverpool who've been drawn to the Strawberry Fields Memorial.
each one grieving a man they knew in a way the rest of the world just couldn't understand.
And it's Pete who speaks first, just answering a stranger's casual question. And with that one sentence, the recognition slowly dawns. Two ghosts finding each other one last time, connected by the memory of the song's departed leader.
And this final meeting is really where the play lands on its ultimate powerful message about what legacy and contribution really mean.
This right here, this is the core argument of the whole play. Pete finally gets to reframe his own story. He wasn't erased, he was foundational. His 2 years pounding the beat in Hamburg weren't just some footnote to the story, they were the very foundation the entire story was built on.
The final scene is just perfect. The two men leave the memorial and they walk off together into the New York night. And as they do, Jimmy starts unconsciously humming the very song he had unknowingly inspired decades earlier. The ghost note, finally audible to the only other person in the world who could truly understand it.
So at the end of it all, you're left with this big, unresolved question. Is being a ghost note a tragedy? Or is it a quiet kind of beauty? Is it better to be the unheard foundation, or to never have been part of the song at all? Something to think about.